Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to talk about early signs of RansomOps in time. So let's start immediately. A little presentation. I'm Giorgio Perticone. I'm Consulting Analyst for Vectra. I work in the IT and security industry from about 8 years now. And I'm really passionate about digital forensics and incident response. And that's pretty much the reason why you see me here taking this presentation. And let me quickly talk about a little housekeeping here. So this that you can see on the slide now is the dashboard you are looking at right now. And you can see me on the top left corner. You can see the slides on the center, and on the bottom widgets you can see a list of resources with some links you can click on to get some more information. You can take our survey, and if you have any question, please use the last widget on the bottom right corner. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. We're going to talk about RansomOps or ransom operations, and I'm going to give you some sort of definition about it. And then I'll go through some of the steps of typical incident response process that we do for some attacks like this. So we're going to talk about preparation, what to do in advance, identification, the core of this webinar, scoping, so how to find out about all of the assets involved in the compromise. Then finally, we'll talk about eradication, and we will summarize everything in the takeaways. So here we go. What is RansomOps? What is ransom operations? I put it in this slide two columns. On the left, you can see what I called legacy ransomware. So basically is what you probably remember malwares as WannaCry did in the past, where it was all about the malware itself. So basically, after the deploy of the malware, it was everything automated from the exploitation of the external facing vulnerabilities to the spread of the infection in the network, but also in other external networks that the malware found in the internet. And the objective of the malware was to, in fact, encrypt all files available in the environment, so that at the end it could ask for a ransom to get the decryption key in order to get access to get back the access to the files. And on the right, I put what modern attacks involving ransomware looks like today. So it is not everything automated. It is human operated, and actually different actors are perpetrating it. So you have, for example, the initial access brokers whose objective is to get access to the target environments, maybe steal credentials, valid credentials, and then sell them to the market. Then you have ransomware as a service businesses, which basically build the malware itself and maintain the command and control infrastructure, so that anyone that buy their services get access to everything, every tool that they need to run an attack like this. So all of these actors involved basically create a type of attack that is more complex than the legacy ransomware's attack, and it could be definitely more stealthy, because from the initial access gained by the initial access brokers, some time can pass before someone actually decide to target your specific environment and deploy a ransomware in there. And probably most important is not all about encryption, because we've seen more and more exfiltration involved in this kind of attacks, where before even encrypting the data, the attackers looks for data, sensitive data that can be exfiltrated, and they use also the exfiltration itself as a threat to make you pay that ransom. So this was the overall definition, and as I mentioned just earlier, these most modern attacks involve different phases, and it's not again all about the encryption. Actually, the encryption itself, you can see that as the deployment phase that is close to the last phase. So we have basically the initial access, where attackers are going to exploit a vulnerability, or maybe phishing some of your users to clicking on a malicious link or downloading any malicious file or something like that, or just purchasing some valid credentials that were breached in the past and use them to access your VPNs or something like that. So those are the most common vectors we see being used by ransomware gangs. And then we have the reconnaissance and lateral movement phases that will be, as you will see, the core of this this webinar. I'm going to talk about about those very, very deep, because we think that's the best moment that you can focus on for the detection phase. Lastly, you have the exfiltration phase, the deployment of the malware, and finally the extortion, when they basically ask for a ransom, in order to get you the decryption and stop the exfiltration. And what I want you to understand on this slide is that we want to prevent the last 3 steps. So those 3 steps are the ones where damage is done. So we want to act before exfiltration, we want to act before encryption, and unfortunately, acting during the initial access, it's usually too difficult. I challenge everyone, to get access to all those logs for all your external facing web application or all of your firewalls, and find out about, in the middle of all of those attempts done by so many actors on the internet, to find out about that one that is actually getting access in order to deploy a ransomware. So our best chance is during the reconnaissance and lateral movement from the attacker side. That's the step where the signal to noise ratio is the best for us to focus on. So let's go through the incident response process. First of all, we have the preparation. Preparation is what you're going to do even before that you're being attacked. That you have an incident running in your environment. So what to do before? We're going, of course, to talk about network forensics, because of course it's what Vectra and Vectra Detect specifically for network does. So what we want to gain before even starting the incident response process to get the more visibility as possible about your environment. So that means that during the deployment of our Vectra sensors, we want to, if it's not possible to actually collect all data from all of your network, at least we usually focus on finding out what are the most critical areas of your network. So where your domain controllers are placed, where your business critical assets are placed, where are your users actually operating on a daily basis. So all of those areas, we want to cover those and collect data from there. So if you have enough visibility, you can think about of course monitoring and detecting the attackers Otherwise, it will be definitely difficult for you. After the deployment, so after ensuring that the visibility is good enough, of course, we want to do some tuning up. So for those of you that you don't know already, our platform, and you can see on the image on the slide on the right, basically prioritize different hosts and accounts in 4 different quadrants based on some prioritization algorithms. And we usually say to our customer that we really want to focus on just the most critical assets, so just on the high and critical quadrants in this case. And that's because the platform itself is already helping us, filtering about the behaviors that looks like more specifically related to a real attack. Okay, so in order to do that, we want to have quite a clean dashboard as the one that you're looking in this slide, and that means that we want to spend some time in knowing more about your environment and defining what are those behaviors that are actually legitimate, but are also noisy enough to move those hosts and accounts in the high and critical quadrants. So using our filter options, our filter features, we can prevent those specific behaviors that we know about already. We can prevent that to be moved to the high and critical quadrants, so that those quadrants will include just the most important and most interesting behaviors. And finally, we can definitely focus a bit on proactive hunting. So of course, our platform will help you in reactive detection. You will have your analyst basically looking into the dashboard, waiting for new alerts and new detections. But in the meanwhile, we wait for a new detection, for a new alert. We can also focus our efforts into studying and understanding those techniques and tactics used by ransomware gangs, and try to find out about those specific techniques applied to our network, even before we get the first detection. And that's a perfect job for Vectra Recall, that is our product that collects all the network metadata from your environment, and you can have a query engine to basically search in all of those sessions and protocols and everything about it. So I'm not going to talk deeply about Vectra Recall in this webinar, but some of my colleagues already did a list of other webinars in the past that I know are available in our YouTube channel, so I encourage you to look for them. So let's start to talk about the identification of the core again of this webinar. As I said before, during the identification phase, we really want to look for those reconnaissance and lateral move techniques used by the malicious actors. And I'll start talking about the reconnaissance first. First, a little definition. What I mean with reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is all about attackers trying to gather information about the environment itself, so that all of those information about assets, about host accounts, data, and so on, can be then used to decide what's the next step they can do. And so we have a list of many different detection based on the reconnaissance. You can see from the screenshot in this slide that quite all of these detections on the left, on the first column, have the recon tag on it. The point is that we're not going to wait for a single detection and get alerted by a single detection for reconnaissance behaviors. This screenshot right here was taken from a real world scenario, and this is what an host, a compromised host running a reconnaissance looks like. So you have a list of many different detections, so a list of many different techniques used by the attackers, that are all attempting to do reconnaissance in your environment. All of these detections show the overall behavior of an attacker, and you'll see the score of the host or the account to increase because all of these detections are all there from the same account. And you can also see on the right that all of these techniques were all used around the same time frame. So there will be always a correlation between all the detections if that's a real attack. In this case, it's the time frame. You know, it can be the same account was used. It could be that all of those are probably targeting some of the same targets, and so on. Now let's deep dive in some of the detections we can see for the reconnaissance phase. By the way, I cannot cover all of them in this webinar. I don't have enough time, but these are some of the example that we've seen, and it's just to give you an idea of what you can see on those cases. So first of all, this is definitely the most simple one. A port sweep is basically a technique where the attacker is scanning a list of IP addresses for some specific ports. First of all, because they want to understand which hosts are active and alive in your network, so they can later target them, and because maybe they are searching for a very specific service that they want to exploit later. In this case, you can see that the attacker was looking for the port 445 or SMB, maybe RPC, and SMB specifically is the protocol that is used on Microsoft environments to share files over a network. So probably if they found out about many different hosts exposing that port and this service, they can also expect to get access to some data. Okay, so this is where they're going to look for the exfiltration phase, for example. Another example, definitely different from the one before. Before we've seen the port sweep that is a single host targeting many different IP addresses at the same time to look for specific ports. Here we have an RPC targeted recon that is alerting us for a host that is contacting a single target, and specifically it's using some RPC function calls that are related with reconnaissance. RPC protocol can be used for both, gathering of data or sending commands, but in this specific detection, we're looking just for gathering of information. And this example here, the screenshot that you can see on this slide, is very, very specific. It was taken from a case of a DCSync attack. Basically, those two function calls, the DRS crack names and DRS get and see changes, are the ones that you will definitely see if an attacker is simulating the behavior of a domain controller, and is actually querying the real domain controller for a replication of the active directory data. So in that case, just targeting a single host, in this case, of course, a critical one, is going to be able to retrieve, many information about your environment. All the machines, all the accounts, all the shares, and so on. And again, for the I already said this. These are just examples, and I want to show you that this is not the only case where a single host is querying the domain controller and you get a detection. Another example is the one you're looking at right now, where suspicious LDAP query detection triggered, and you can see that. I hope you actually can see because it's a little too small, but I can say to you that this query was querying the domain controller for all subnets and all computers in Active Directory. And it was actually retrieving over 1,000 of objects from this query. The point here is that before even looking into detections, you have to know about your environment. So you have to know if and when your maybe privileged accounts or your administrators are going to run query like this, if they actually are, And usually I will not expect one of my legitimate users to run a broad query like this, because you should have probably your own CMDB, your own database with your assets, so you don't need to run a query to get all of the assets from your domain controller, at least in a general scenario. So this when you see something like this, this should be alerting you about something. So this is not usually expected in my environment. So probably this is suspicious, and I have to deep dive in this. So after the examples about the reconnaissance phase, here's something from the lateral movement phase. Again, little definition. Lateral movement is the act of moving through your environment, and especially moving from a host to the other to spread in your environment and establishing more and more footholds, so that for any reason, maybe if you start your response process, the attackers can still maintain some level of access in your environment. And I put again an example from a real world scenario where a compromised host was running lateral movement behaviors. Again, you can see not a single detection, but 3-4 different detections, all of which are suggesting me this user on this host is trying to lateral move to other hosts. And again, these are all correlated for the timestamps, and I can compare this to the normal behavior of the host, to the normal behavior of my user that I should know about. So if I don't have any detection, if I don't have any suspicious behavior before this, and suddenly I have 5 of this detection suggesting me this is trying to mess around with my environment, there's the moment where I have to start my my response process. Of course, again, all of this detection together will increase the score, the priority score of the host, and you'll see that host in the critical quadrant. So just daily reviewing your critical and high quadrants should be enough to detect something like this. Here again, I go through some examples of detections talking about the lateral movement, and the first one is probably one of the most interesting. So privilege anomaly detections in general, we have a list of them, all of which are using the same naming convention, so privilege anomaly something. All of these are taking into the consideration those 3 elements you can see on the screenshot. So the host, the account, and service and target. So this kind of algorithm is trying to understand what is the normal, the common behavior of on your environment, and anytime that it finds that the combination of these 3 elements are showing something that is uncommon. So for example, in this case, you can see that the hosts and accounts were usually seen interacting together before, but this is the first time both of them are using this service on that target. So this is a way in which our platform is help you in better understanding your own environment. So the platform try to understand what are the common behaviors you should know as well at some level. And here you can see that this is an anomaly. So this can actually be someone that stole, for example, the credential for this account. And for the first time, since the normal user for this account was not using this kind of service, for the first time, it was messing around with that service specifically. Maybe because that service is exposing some vulnerability that the user want to exploit, or maybe the attacker is just exploiting the privileges of that user account to do something that it is actually not expected. Second example, pretty different from the one before. Here you have a single host interacting with a list of different targets, And for all of these sessions run all at the same time, you have every time the same traffic ID. Traffic ID is basically some sort of hash of the payload. So you can determine from here that basically, the malicious scenario behind this is that the attacker got access to the source host, and then is trying to maybe send the payload for the same vulnerability on many different hosts. Take into consideration the first example I did with the port sweep. So the attacker was first looking for all of those targets exposing port 445, maybe with a specific version that they know it's vulnerable for a specific vulnerability, and then they actually send the payload to exploit all of those targets at once. Okay, and this is definitely the kind of detection that you will see for that kind of behavior. Further example, here you see suspicious remote execution that is, from the name is quite straightforward, but just to explain a bit, this detection is specifically monitoring for RPC calls again. And in this case, instead of function calls used to gather information, it is monitoring for those functions that are sending commands, sending code, and interacting with processes and services on the desired target. And again, this is looking for anomalies. So if the host and accounts are not usually seen executing such functions, will not trigger something like this. On the other way, this screenshot right here is showing you that specific host and accounts are interacting with that domain controller and are using the you can see on the end of the screenshot the function start service W. So it's probably interacting with a service on the target, and maybe it's also trying to establish some sort of persistence in the target itself. Again, another example of trying to exploiting a second host, another host, in order to spread into your environment and enlarge their footholds. So this was all about the identification phase. And also, if this is not the core of the webinar, I want to focus a bit on the scoping phase. This is probably one of the phases that is is not always the best focus during an incident response process, because all of us, of course, want to eradicate the attacker as soon as possible. Of course, the business owners want to know that the attackers were kicked out. But the fact about this phase is that it's really important in order to be sure that all of the compromised assets are being contained and then eradicated. Because the fact is that if you're going to too quickly to eradicate, maybe you're eradicating just some of the assets that the attacker have compromised, and when you do eradicate and you think the incident is fixed, maybe the attacker understood that you were actually responding to the incident and were maybe stealthy, hiding somewhere in your network, so you don't notice that anymore, and they will wait until you are not going through your incident response process anymore, and in that way they can start again maybe after a few weeks to run their activities. So here's just some general examples how you could do some scoping. So of course we're talking about network forensics. So basically, if you know which are some of the hosts that were compromised, you can look at in the incident time frame which other hosts and accounts that compromised host interacted with. So you should consider all of the different hosts with which it interacted should be compromised as well. Of course, if you know about some malicious public IPs that were coming from, for example, the command and control infrastructure of the attacker, if you see any of your user accounts on your VPN or any other assets interacted with from your perimeter, again, all of them assume compromised. Finally, during your incident response process, during your identification phase, you will find out about many different IOCs, IP addresses, URLs, file names, and so on. So use that, and probably a product like Vectra Recall can help with that. Use those to query your environment and find out every host that contacted that IP, every user that clicked on that link, every every SMB session that shared that specific file, and so on. All of those actions can help you identify if any other hosts were compromised during the incident. Let me actually provide you some example from a recent real-world scenario that we had responding to an incident like this. And all of these are actually involving Vectra Recall. So the first one you can see on this slide, you can see that from a pickup file that we gathered from one of our detection, we identified that an RPC call was using the administrator user. The fact was that we spoke with the customer, and they said to us that they do not use the standard administrator user. All of their administrator actually use some ad hoc user, and they created for their roles. So from that point, we knew that the administrator user, whatever was the host from which it was used, was probably related to the attacker. So in that case, we took that username and we looked into the metadata and TLM stream of Recall, and using the username field for the value administrator. And again, any host that authenticated with that username could be collected and inserted in the list for the compromised host. Same thing, the same username. We use the metadata RDP stream, and probably you know already that RDP sessions, if not encrypted, can include a cookie field that contain the first 8 characters of the username used for that RDP session. So knowing that, we did a query in the RDP stream, and we looked into the cookie field. We inserted the administrator, so first 8 characters, value in it, and we found out about all of the hosts that the attacker compromised, and where it started RDP sessions to move laterally to other hosts in the environment. A couple of other examples. So during that incident response, we found out that the exfiltration phase involved a known resource online called temp.sh, where anyone can upload files and data. So we also knew that the customer was really using the domain for legitimate reasons. So we again looked into Recall, and we selected the DNS record info stream, and looking for the query field of those DNS requests, we searched for any host that ran DNS query for that specific domain. So again, any host that used that the DNS query to look for that domain was considered compromised from that time on. One last example, again, downloading a pickup file from one of our detections we noticed that many different SMB connections were including the file name delete.me. So after some research, we found out that is an IOC consistent with the NetScan tool, and that is a reconnaissance tool used by different attackers. And knowing that, it was simple to go to the SMB file stream on Recall, where we can look for all files shared via SMB, and specifically the name field was researched for the delete.me value. And again, we knew every host where the attacker was running that specific tool. So last but not least, this webinar was of course thought to focus on the identification part, but well, it's I'm quite forced to talk about the eradication phase, because everyone wants to be sure that the attackers are not there anymore. So these, you can see on this slide, are some of the suggestions that we gave to our customer during that scenario. And you have to take into consideration that was a very specific scenario, and I hope that you understood at this point that there could be many different ways an attacker can interact with your network before deploying the ransomware. So the fact is that this list here is probably good for any incident, but there could be also other actions you can do to ensure access is prevented for those specific attackers after the incident. So specifically, we of course suggested to reimage all involved hosts in the compromise, and of course be sure that your images were taken before the actual compromise, or you're not doing what you expect. In that specific case, all Active Directory and all domain controllers were compromised. So of course we suggested an enterprise-wide password reset, and to be sure that any ticket granted by Kerberos was resetted, the only way to do that is to reset it twice. So again, this is very specific for that scenario, but it's always good to know. Any known IOC, any known external IOC, like malicious IPs or domains, should be blocked on your perimeter, so on your firewall and so on. And if any vulnerability was known to be exploited by the attacker for the initial access, you should review your external attack surface and make sure all of those are patched. So one last slide, just to summarize all I've said during this webinar. I just spoke at the start of the webinar that there are some most common vectors of attack for the initial access. So you should definitely try for preventing those initial access. Of course, it's not you cannot be sure that you will prevent any attack, but lowering the risk of being breached is definitely a good thing. So be sure to enable your multi-factor authentication for all of your users. Take the time to do some user training about phishing emails, and to prevent them to click on any phony link or download any malicious file. And if you're not doing that, definitely go for creating a vulnerability management process. If you're doing it already, improve it, and always look for those vulnerabilities that are being exploited actively in the wild in that specific moment, to patch those first. And yeah, again, little summary about identification. You should improve your capabilities before you actually have an incident. So maximize the visibility on your environment. Deploying more sensors, more Vectra sensor can be one good example, but of course, the more visibility in many different ways, the better is. And try to prioritize as much as possible, because you don't want to focus your efforts in something that is not that important, that critical. You should definitely go for proactivity. So you can wait for the next alert, but you can also actively look for behaviors, tactics, techniques that are known to be used by attackers that you expect to target your environment. So do your research, establish maybe a threat intelligence capability to know about the groups that you should worry about, and study those behaviors, those techniques, and find out about how you would expect those techniques to be applied to your network, what you should see as an evidence to detect those. And finally, scoping is huge. Scoping is important. So before you think about containing, before you think about eradication, be sure enough that all of the compromised hosts were identified. Don't go too quickly to start that final process, because it can basically let you start from scratch if the attackers are still there in your environment. So this was my last slide. I was pretty quick, actually. Was not expecting that. But if you have any questions, please use the widget in the dashboard in front of you, so I can reply to some of them. So I actually see some questions I can take the time to reply to. So first question I see here is, I've seen a detection called ransomware file activity. How does this relate to ransomware ops? Very, very good question. So it's true. In our platform, we do have a detection called ransomware file activity, so a specific alert saying there is activity from a node that looks like a ransomware being deployed. So the point here is that I said this at the start of the webinar. We're trying to our best efforts are trying to prevent the encryption itself. That specific detection is looking for the malware actually interacting with many files, changing their names. So basically, the process of encryption. Okay, so this is actually one of the last phases of the kill chain of a ransomware ops attack. So of course that will help, but at that point it's basically already too late. Okay, of course you want to contain as soon as possible if you see some detection like those and are confirmed malicious. But what I've shown you during the webinar is a list of detection that you would expect even before the malware is being deployed. Okay, and that is our best scenario. Of course, we want to prevent it, so we want to look for what the attacker is doing before. Another question here. I've heard ransomware ops can conduct their attacks very quickly. How much time will we have to respond to an incident? This is a very good and difficult question, of course. So the answer is it depends. We have seen attackers starting from the initial access to and going to deploy the ransomware in basically in one day, in a few hours. And at the same time, there are some scenarios where the initial access and the deployment phases are really are not that close, so it can last also weeks or months. So the point here is, yeah, you should respond as quick as possible, of course. And of course, we're trying to help you with that, with our products and our MDR services. But the point is, the more you can improve your responding capabilities, and the more you can implement measures inside your network to delay the actions for an attacker to lateral move in your environments, the better the better is. So you cannot predict specifically how much time it will take for the attacker to deploy the malware, so you have to respond as soon as possible. So I see another question here. You didn't mention the containment phase of incident response. It is not possible to contain a ransomware group? So good question. So in my webinar here, in my slides, I've gathered, let's say the core stages of the incident response. It is missing also, for example, the lesson learned after everything. But the point is that containment is of course difficult, especially during an attack like this. And the point is that you don't want to alert the attacker too early. Okay, if you start containment too early, when you see the first host, it is exactly what we discussed about the scoping. Okay, if you did not scoping well and you start containing, you will just alert the attacker that will hide inside your network. So of course you can do some containment. Probably the best thing to do is to try to prevent access to your business critical data repositories. Okay, so if the attacker has not already got access to them, and you know that they are close to get access to those files that they will try to exfiltrate and encrypt, you can start from completely disconnect and deny access to those repositories from anyone. Okay, if that's not of course too much business critical for it, and that is probably the best thing to do. But also, if the attacker is in a very specific area of your environment, and you can again prevent some other areas that are not touched yet to be the attacker to lateral move to those areas, you can try to disconnect some specific routes, some specific connection to those parts, to the DMZ, or to, I don't know, another business critical areas that the attacker didn't touch yet. So that's what containment is. So you can definitely do that, but always ensure that scoping was doing well first. Okay. So I see a question relating these slides, if they are being shared at some point. And this is definitely something we can discuss later. I don't know what's the specific process, but as customer, we can talk about this definitely. So maybe we can reach to you after this meeting for sure. So I cannot see any other questions so far. So I think this will be the end of the webinar. So thank you all for taking the time to hear me today. Hope that this was helpful for you, and hope that you'll have a nice day. Bye, everyone.